Good evening, good morning, good night. Whatever the case may be, it's your favorite, and I do mean favorite, world history teacher ever. It's me, the one and only Coach Hughes. So, what we're currently discussing, or have been discussing, uh, right before the break, was in your world history books, Chapter 8, the ancient Greeks. And we talked about their democracy, their oligarchy. We talked about their geography and how they had to rely on their peninsula and their geographical features surrounding that peninsula, mainly water, fishing, to say the least, in order to survive. And we talked a little bit about Greek mythology and Zeus and Poseidon and Aphrodite. Oh, the lovely, lovely Aphrodite. So today we're going to dive in a little bit about Greece's surroundings and who that involved and how that could possibly bring these different Greek city states that we're going to talk about together. So let's dive into the world that is Chapter 9, Section 1, shall we? So, the Persian Empire. Now, the Persian Empire from the Greek peninsula is going to be kind of off to the right if you're looking at a map. And the Persians were warriors. Yeah. But they were also nomads. And remember what nomads were all the way back from the Stone Age. They moved from place to place in the search for food. Food. Gotta have food to survive. So they were these nomads, but they were also warriors. You had to be warriors if you're going to move from place to place. And they lived in what today is southwestern area of what is known as Iran, the country of Iran, there in the Middle Eastern area. Now, in 550 BC, the Persian king Cyrus II, also known as Cyrus the Great, won independence from a group called the Medes. And he went on to conquer almost all of Southwest Asia. Now, why is this important? It's kind of like dominoes. If you set up dominoes, and you knock over that first domino, what happens? All the other dominoes kind of fall over. Hopefully, you're pretty good at that. Now, in this case, when you have this nomadic warrior, Cyrus the Second, Cyrus the Great, he kind of gets a taste of power. My medieval laugh. And when he gets a taste of power, and once he conquers one country, and all those people start having to pay a tribute, also known as a tax, or become subjects to him or slaves, that gives him this enormous amount of power, this thirst for more and more power. So he kind of has that ability to conquer one after another, kind of like dominoes. Now, also, he had a well organized army, included many chariots and powerful, and I do mean powerful, cavalry. And this is a must. If you're going to if I can use a line from the Animaniacs, Pinky and the Brain. Hey, Brain. What are we gonna do today, Brain? Same thing we do every day, Pinky. Try and take over the world. So, if you want to be that guy, if you want to be that guy, if you want to be the brain and try to take over the world, you're going to need a little help. And when you have a well trained, well disciplined army that will adhere to instructions, it's a pretty good combination in the realm of it's hard to beat you in a match. Now, Cyrus let the people he conquered, hey, keep your own customs. Why? Why? Rebellion. Less likely to rebel. If you treat people in a certain way, if you make those people happy, if you let them keep on doing the things that they're doing and not institute change, because people hate change. Think about it. If your schedule is screwed up, do you like that? No. People absolutely hate change. So what he was trying to do is to reduce the amount of change that these people that he conquered had. And if he did that and they kept living on their lives, their daily lives, day after day, without a lot of change, out of a lot of interruption, then they are less likely to rebel. And as a result, few people in the empire actually did rebel. Now, I'm not going to say not everyone did, and I'm sure that there were a few, but the majority said, I'm doing the same thing I was doing before this guy came. So I'm not in a big bind here. Not a lot of people rebelled, and as a result, the empire remained strong, if not stronger. Now, by the time Cyrus died, around 529 BC, Cyrus ruled the largest, think about this, the largest empire the world had ever seen. By 529, nobody done it better than Cyrus II. Hence, why he became in history known as Cyrus the Great. Originally, Cyrus the Dos. Cyrus number two. Cyrus the Great. Why? Because he created the freaking biggest empire the world had ever seen. How did he do it? He let people keep their own customs, their own traditions. He had a well organized, disciplined army. Those are all things that you're going to need to know for the quiz and the test. Now, not everybody lives forever. A lot of people wish that Cyrus the Great had lived on. After Cyrus the Great's death, Darius I seized power at the death of Cyrus's son. Okay? And he left Persia without a clear leader. Now, Darius, circle B. Here's what you need to know. Darius organized the empire by dividing it into 20 provinces or satrapies. And he chose governors called satraps to rule over the province. Now, think about this. Cyrus had the largest empire the world ever seen. We've already mentioned that. That's why he became Cyrus the Great. But think about communication back then. No internet, no telly. Hello. None of that. Communication was slow. If he wanted to, and we're talking about Darius the First, if he wanted to keep his thumb on things, if he wanted to keep this empire that Cyrus had built up, he had to figure out a way to control it. He knows that even though he is king, dictator, over everything, he can't possibly rule day to day. So he divides his empire up. Think of it like this. The United States of America is divided up into 50 states. Darius the First here, he divided the empire up into basically 20 states. You will call them provinces. Or back then, Darius called them satrapies. So he breaks the empire up into 20 different satrapies, aka province, aka state. And each of those provinces was controlled by a satrap. You know it in today's world as a governor. And the governor was in charge of their state, or in this case, a satrap was in charge of their satrapy, their province. Okay. This made it easier to rule on a local level. Okay. Even though, keep in mind, Darius the First controlled it all, it was all on him, it was all under him. But for government purposes, it was easier to control if you broke it up into smaller pieces. And that's what we've done here in the United States. The president is clearly over the United States along with the branches of government. But on a more local level, the governor controls the state. Even today, you have a more local level. The mayor controls an area that is much smaller than the state. Now, let's talk about the Persian military. It grows stronger, my friend. Now, way back with Cyrus, The Persians were known for a well-disciplined, well-trained military. Now, the military of Persia, though, consisted of full-time paid soldiers known as immortals. I am immortal. Now, it didn't mean that they lived forever. Did not mean that. Now, I know what you're thinking. Video games, zombies, whatever. Immortal, to the majority of people, means you live forever. You can't die. Now, to the people that fought Persia, it might have seemed like the men in the Persian military were immortal, that you couldn't kill them. And that's kind of how they get their nickname a little bit, because they were well trained, they were disciplined, but they were full-time paid soldiers. All right. And these full-time paid soldiers might not even be people from Persia. You just pay somebody to fight in your military. Now, compare that to the United States military. Obviously, the men and women of our military do get paid, but they have a stake in the military. They're from the United States. They defend this country. They have family that lived in this country. If the United States got into a war and they could not pay these soldiers, do you think the people, the men and women of the U.S. military would stop fighting? No way. Nada. Not going to happen. They're fighting for their family. They're fighting for their freedom. They're fighting for their fellow man. They have a stake in what they're fighting for. But if you look at the Persians, these immortal soldiers, and what they're fighting for, maybe their family doesn't live here. Maybe if the Persian military can't pay them, then they're like, I'm going to the house. I'm not going to fight. Or worst case scenario, you get into a bidding war. The Persians fight somebody, and that country offers those soldiers more money, money, money. They offer them more money, and they switch sides. That would be pretty bad. So there is something to be said for allegiance to a country. Now, Darius expanded the Persian Empire eastward to the Indus Valley, also known as India, and the western toward southeast Europe. He called himself the King of Kings. Sounds like Triple H in the WWE, but I'm not going to get to that. All right, to remind other rulers that you may rule these areas, but I am the quote unquote King of Kings. I rule it all. Now, Darius's many improvements to Persian society included roads. What? Roads? What's the big deal about roads? Roads led to places. But more importantly, remember the efficiency of the Persian military. If you got on a road and it was kind of a straight shot minus the curves there, it was more efficient to travel by road from place to place to get your military from location to location and possibly to fight in these various locations much, much quicker. Messengers used these roads to travel quickly too throughout Persia. Darius also built a new capital called Persepolis. I want to say Metropolis, as in Clark Kent, aka Superman, but it's Persepolis here. Now, during his reign, a popular new religion, circle F, no F for the quiz, no F for the test, Zoroastrianism arose in Persia. Now, this religion taught that the forces of good, I am good, and evil were fighting for control of the universe. Think of the Force. Think of Star Wars here. The balance of the Force. You got to have that. And this is more or less good versus evil for control of the universe. Now, the religion just made sense to many of the Persians. Now, eventually, we've talked about all in chapter 8, the rise of the ancient Greeks. And now in the first chapter of chapter 9, we've talked about this mighty, mighty Persian Empire. And when you have two mighty empires, usually what happens is they're on a collision course. Fight night is a brewing. Okay. Now, in 499 BC, several Greek cities in what is now the country of Turkey, yes, Turkey is actually a country, rebelled against Persian rule. They were done, not putting up with it anymore. And eventually they were joined by a few city-states from mainland Greece. And this basically put all of the city-states in Greece on a collision course with this utmost powerful Persian Empire. The Persians put down the revolt, but 9 years later, Darius invaded Greece, and it started the Persian Wars. It's Greece. It's Persia. It's the Persian Wars. So let's talk about the Persian Wars. Now, first up, you got to know one thing. There are many, and I do many battles in a war. And battles can be won by both sides. It does not affect the outcome of a war unless you win all the battles, or if you are winning the majority of a battle, or if you put a stranglehold on the other opponent. So first up, any battle we talk about, you're pretty much going to have to know for the quiz and the test. So the Battle of Marathon. It occurred in 490 BC on the plain of Marathon, a short distance from Athens. Now, the Persians, they got in the ships. You see the ships right below this, my picture, my lovely picture here. All right, see this picture. They were crowded on those boats. Now, really look at this picture. All the Persians loaded up on their boats, and they came across the sea to the mainland there on Greece, to Marathon. Here's what you need to know. Think of it as prior to a football game, prior to a basketball game. Woo! You got a lot of energy. You're building up a lot of energy. You have a lot of things running through your body. Adrenaline, it's flowing through your brains. You're pumped up. You know you're going to do battle. You know if you're in a sport, you're going to go out there, take the court, take the football field. You're building up this adrenaline. It's running through you. So all of these people right below me on the boat, they pull up, they unload, they get off their boats. They've got all this adrenaline running. The Persians there, they wait on the plane, they spread out, they pump each other up. They're hitting, their chest pumping, they're doing all those, and they're waiting. They're going to Persia! And they're waiting and waiting and waiting. And they're waiting. Persia! And they're waiting. We'll fight for Persia! And they're waiting. And they're waiting. And really, nothing happens. They get so fired up and nothing happens. And they're kind of shocked by this. Even the leaders, even the generals, they don't know what to do. And finally, the Persian commanders go, back on the boats, back on the boats. They scream, back on the boats. And all of these Persian leaders who had all of this adrenaline running through their body, all these soldiers, now the adrenaline starts to fade. And look, they get on these crowded boats and they're crammed in there. And it's kind of like Halloween. If you eat a lot of candy on Halloween, you get this sugar high. But then what happens after all that candy's ate? Your body kind of goes limp, and the sugar high is gone. That's what happens with adrenaline. All right, after that initial rush. So these soldiers, without fighting, without playing a sport, without doing anything, their energy is just wiped and they're give out. And now they're crowded back on the boats. But it was all a trap. The Greeks planned this. They sit there. They watched the Persians go through this. When the horsemen and the last soldiers were back on the Persian boats, the Greeks, they charged. They fired arrows. These arrows are coming down, and guess what? They're going to hit people because the people are crammed in the boats. They're going, boom, boom, ah. All of these arrows firing down at these people. It was a total surprise attack. The Greeks outthought the Persians. This mighty military, these disciplined soldiers that listened to the instructions, they were outwitted by the Greeks. And the Persians were defeated at the Battle of Marathon simply because the Greeks outsmarted them. Brain power over brawn, man. Look at the 24-inch pythons. So the Greeks won this first battle, and because of the surprise attack, they had better weapons, armor, all of it didn't matter. Okay? It came down to surprise, outwitting the opponent. Now, this really, really ticked the Persians off. The Persians were sent home with their tails between their legs, basically. Now, after Darius's death, his son Xerxes, that's the guy over there with all the chains, he became king of Persia, and he wanted vengeance. He wanted vengeance for all the people that were killed, all the Persians that were killed in the Battle of Marathon. He hated the Greeks, and he wanted vengeance. Now, Athens and Sparta, they were both Greeks. They were both Greek city-states. Athens were known for their brain power, which we saw in the last battle. That was good. And Sparta was known for athleticism. But they didn't like each other. And really, they didn't like each other. But there's a saying, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. And Athens and Sparta, they joined forces to defend the Greek mainland and the Greeks against Xerxes' attacks. Now, the Greeks fought the Persians at Thermopylae for 2 days. For 2 days. And the Greeks ended up losing the battle. And really, this is kind of what the movie 300 based on, the 300 Spartans, where they fought the Persian army. And now, I said the Persians were well disciplined. The Spartans are well disciplined too, and they are excellent warriors. Now, the Greeks lost the battle at Thermopylae, but it allowed Athens, the city-state of Athens, to build 200 ships. And these ships were much smaller. They could maneuver much quicker. Whoa, look at me. And they were much faster. So, even though the Greeks lost the Battle of Thermopylae, at the next battle, and know all these battles, at the Battle of Salamis, the Greeks used these faster, smaller ships to defeat the Persian fleet. But the Persians entered the city of Athens and pretty much burned the city of Athens down. Not all of it, but pretty much. The Greek army won at Plataplay. This was the turning point of the war with Persia. Now, the Persian Empire fell. The Greeks are victorious for several reasons. The Persians were weakened by war. Their rulers taxed their people too much tribute. They were getting too much money because they were greedy, and spent the money lavishly for themselves while their people lived in poverty. You're going to have a problem with that. And the sons of kings had little power, so they ended up killing other rulers to get more power. And when you kill all the smart people that know what to do and how to run the government, you're left with unintelligent people running the government, which is no good there as well. So the result of the Persian Wars is that Greece won. And this propels Athens and Sparta into the limelight. But remember, the bigger and more powerful the Persians got, the Greeks were too, and it set them on a collision course. Now that you have Athens and Sparta emerging as kind of the world leaders, the world domination of city-states here, eventually you have two big city-states that didn't like each other to begin with. And you kind of see where I'm going with that. We're on a collision course between Athens and Sparta, and we'll save that for another day. All right. Hope you learned something in this chapter 9, section 1 notes. Until I see you again, have a great day. God bless. And as always, roll tide.